send them off well. We didn't get to do that this year. And so we've been doing a small part of that here at these Bible studies. And so tonight, it's funny, two seniors who are both equally quiet and unassuming. They don't fly under the radar. And that's what I love about both of these people. I'm just going to kind of speak of them together, just because they are very similar, though one is very short and one is very tall. They're just consistent, faithful brothers and sisters in Christ. I mean, consistent in discipleship, consistent in worship, consistent in helping, consistent in allowing the Lord to lead them and guide them. And in some of those cases, that was to this place to be invested in and to hear truth and to grow, and then to turn and give that away. And they're just sweet reminders that the Lord uses every type of person, every type of personality to draw others to himself. And so first I'll just go with Miss Abby. And I know you both are very quiet, and so we don't expect a 20-minute speech unless you have one. Then we would love to hear your voices. And so this is funny. The BSU's Resident Rapunzel Award goes to Miss Abby for her beautiful long hair. And so we're just so thankful. We're so proud of you for graduating. Come on up here. But I will give you some space to chat.
Hey everyone, there's a lot of you tonight. So I just first wanted to tell you guys a little story about how I first started coming to the BSU. So I was always really involved in my church, and I never really felt the need to be part of kind of ministry. And I went to CNM for a year and a half before I transferred here, so I didn't even know that the BSU existed. And so Joy and Victoria started coming here, and they invited me to come, and Joy told me about parking here, and I was like, okay, that sounds great. I definitely want to do that. If I have to go to a Bible study or something, I can do that. But I just didn't really know much about the ministry. So so I started going to freshman life group with Victoria, even though I was actually a sophomore already. And then Victoria and I went to Paradigm twice, and I was like, okay, this is pretty weird. They sing with the lights off. There's tons of people here. I don't really think I like this. So I did not have any intentions to ever come to Paradigm, but the Lord had different plans. And so the next semester, I had a class that ended at 6:30 on Thursday night. So when I would get back here, my car was totally blocked in. So I was basically forced to come to Paradigm. And I actually ended up really liking it. I realized that I really liked it. And so, so even after that class, I kept coming, and it was just really refreshing to be able to come here and worship with God's people and hear from his word. So I just wanted to thank the staff for all that they do to make this such a great place, and just for being so welcoming. It's really clear how you all care about college students and pouring into their lives. So the BSU is just such a great community to have in the midst of a very lost campus who desperately needs Christ. So I also wanted to just share a couple of things with you guys that the Lord has taught me throughout college and through coming here. I have had a really hard time just knowing how to find a balance between serving in my church and and just being involved here. So what I've learned is that this ministry is for you as a college student. And so they have things here that are especially going to assist you during this time in your life, but the church also needs college students. And so I just want to challenge you all to take the things that you learn here and bring those things to your churches now. Don't let serving in church be something that you wait to do till after you graduate. But also don't let serving in church be an excuse for you to not be involved here. Being part of a local body of believers is really important. Big Churches has just showed me God's love for his people in new ways that I would have never experienced through my church. So I guess what I'm trying to say is find a balance between being involved in this ministry and being involved in your church. And then another thing I've learned is when it comes to your schoolwork, work hard as unto the Lord. Go to your classes, but also make time to invest in others and be invested in. So it's good to find a balance there too, to work hard in your school, but be living for Christ, not for school. And then I also just wanted to share a verse with you guys, which I'm sure is very familiar to most of you, but it's one of my favorites. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." So being in college has just really challenged me to trust in the plans that the Lord has for me and not my own plans. So yeah, and thank you all so much for investing in this ministry. It's definitely been a blessing in my life. And yeah, I'm going to grad school, so I'll still be around. But yeah, thanks, guys.
That was great. Graham, why don't you come on up here? We have the We'll Always Look Up to You award. So you're just a role model, and you're very tall. And
so, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Wyatt for being my discipler. I've been here. And I just want to say, it took me a while to really get involved here. For the first few years, I sort of came around to see friends, and I didn't really do much. But over this past year, it's been really good. I've gotten involved in discipleship. And I think I was sort of shying away from that because of the way it challenges you differently than in a big group Bible study where there's no group to hide behind. But it's been really good to sort of just confront your problems and help with that. So I'd like to say discipleship has been a huge blessing, and if you're on the fence about it, absolutely do it. I'd also like to thank all the staff while I've been here. This has been a wonderful time. And I just want to remind you all, things can seem pretty depressing right now with the pandemic and the riots and the lockdowns and the chaos. But just remember that our hope is in God, and the world needs people like us right now. You know, in 1 Timothy 4:12, it says, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity." That's something we all need to strive for. I think we should be an example, not just to believers, but also to the world. Thanks.
all right, so we didn't get to honor all our seniors because some of them have work schedules, some of them are out of town, some of them didn't want to come, and we've just said never come back. We never want to see your face around here again. And so know that the discipleship and the investment that they're talking about is going to be available this coming semester. And yeah, it's not in lieu of your church. You'll hear me say that all year. Some of you are just rolling your eyes when you hear me say that. Some of your churches have nothing for you at this age. They don't want you serving. They don't have anything for you to do. They just want you to kind of, just exist. And we exist here to just really equip you in this important time. And some of your churches have lots for you to do. And so we would love for you to take what you learn here now and begin to just pour in. But our desire is to fill you up. Our desire is to fill you with God's word and point you to it and encourage you. And our desire is to study God's word together in such a way that it becomes less confusing and more, and I want to say enlightening, because I feel that's a term that is bad, but more understandable. And I hope Genesis has done that. So we are at the end of our Genesis study. And if you're like, geez, you finished all of Genesis, the answer to that is no. We did Genesis 1-11, and we're kind of bumping into 12. And the reality is, I hope, as we've studied this together, you guys have seen the intention of the writer, and you've heard through the ears of the original people who are hearing it. And in doing so, you understand the text for what it was meant to mean when it was written. Okay, because I feel like, and tonight we're going, it's the covenant with Abraham, right? And so like, I know all of you are like, oh, cool, missions talk. And so yeah, the covenant means all the families will be blessed. Jesus came from Abraham, and all the nations are now being blessed through missions. And that's honestly how I handle this passage for the most part. But the reality is, this slow study, as we consider it's Moses writing, okay, Moses knows that he's not entering the promised land. So through this 40 years wandering in the desert, he's compiling all these stories and texts. He's hearing and talking from the Lord. He is writing this legacy, this reality for Israel, who is now on the very cusp of entering the promised land, right? And so it's funny because tonight we are studying that promise, that when God promised he would give them that land. And like, you just kind of have to do the intentional work to put your mind where the writer's mind was, which was this huge nation of people who have been wandering in a desert, wanting to get into the promised land, because the first time the Lord tried to give it to them, they doubted him and didn't have faith. I mean, that's what we've been talking about this whole first 11 chapters of this book, and it's just going to continue. And it probably happened in your life today, right? Like, that's the reality of humanity. And this story, the writer is just intentionally talking about the character of God, what he's like, what he does. This is a book about him. Right? This is a book about how he works and how he moves. And I quickly want to just be like, oh yeah, have faith like Abraham and go out and trust the Lord. And oh, if God calls you away from something good, he's going to give you something better, right? Like, these are lots of lessons that we can make. And as I was kind of putting this message together and thinking about how are we going to end this study, the Lord just called my heart and said, Kyle, just read it and allow what's there to be what's there. And trust me, it'll be encouraging. And I hope that it is, because it's funny, because we're at the very end of what we started, which is actually the very beginning of the nation of Israel, right? Like, and so our ending is a huge beginning, right? That will lead to the gospel, that will lead to the glory of God among the nations and all those truths. But the reality is, I think there's something really special here. And I think that special message is not about us, not about how we should act, not about how we should adapt our living, not about how we should step out in faith, but it's about the God who saved us, right? The God who constantly in this story has overcome sin and saved us. Because if you remember, just a little recap, God created and blessed, right? This is the very beginning, chapter 1 and 2, man sinned. God cast them out, but was still with them, man murdered. God sent him away, but was still mindful of them and thinking of them, man disregarded God. God destroyed all flesh, but Noah and his family sinned, right? God blesses Noah's family, allows them to grow. They grew in incorrect worship. And that's what we talked about last week, right? Like, as they grew, they were so distanced from God. There's just this story. We've talked about it so many times. And some of you might can identify with this. Like sin separates you from God. Right? We just want to make it kind of think like, oh no, you did something bad, slap on the wrist, can't be with God. God's kind of stuck up. And so he has to be pure. But like, the reality is, it creates this chasm. And it's almost a perfect picture of that. And this writer is intentionally showing Israel that. Like, do you see how much sin distanced you from God? First people, Adam and Eve, out of the garden, right? Cain, cast away. And now God's looking up down at the earth, seeing how violent it is, and he destroys it. Right after that, God is way up on in heaven and sees these people doing this terrible thing. We talked about it last week, just false worship, just missing the point of who he is, not able to understand. No way they would know him and reach him. And so he comes in his kindness and confuses their language and disperses them and stops what was happening, right? Because he's like, man, if I let this nonsense continue, if I let this false worship continue, they're never going to reach me. Right? They're trying to build a tower, right? Like to kind of bring me down, and so I'll go back up. Like, they've totally missed me. And the next story, what does God do? Right? Out of that pagan world, out of that world that doesn't know him, it doesn't seek him. And when they do seek him, they're really asking a God to kind of give them good crops and health and this and that. They don't love him. They don't want him. God again acts. Right? He created, he destroyed, he remained, he kept the remnant, and here he dispersed them, and then he calls out Abraham, and that's our story this evening, right? This story of a God who just really like has a plan, and though humans continue to ruin it and thwart it, and Abraham's going to do the exact same thing. Anytime you start thinking, man, I wish I had faith like Abraham, remember that like he kind of whored his wife out. Right? Like, everywhere he goes, he was afraid that we're not going to get to those stories. So we have to mention that now. He would just kind of send his wife to the king, who was beautiful, right? If they know that you're my wife, they'll kill me and they'll take you, right? And like, no faith, right? He got a concubine and didn't trust God and had another wife, right? And had another family, right? Anytime you think, man, I just need to be bold like David, remember Bathsheba. Right? Remember the end of his ministry that just crumbled. Anytime you think I need to be wise like Solomon, remember his words saying, basically, don't live like I lived. It's all heaven. Right? Like, all of these Old Testament characters, don't get me wrong, there are some admirable things about them, but those are only admirable because God's there. right? Like God constantly is moving and acting on their behalf. He's constantly rising kings up and bringing them down, moving them towards something that will, instead of just the shadow, right? That's what the Old Testament is. We're gonna talk about that a little bit tonight. Instead of just the shadow, he can bring about the substance, which is Jesus, right? And so we're going to be ending this evening with Abraham, right? With the Father Abraham, I'm one of them, you're many, and his faith and his great faith and this and that. But the reality is, the writer again is highlighting something bigger than Abraham, right? And for some reason, we as humans just want to read this story and learn about Abraham instead of the God, right, who just, in spite of humanity, continues to act and save and move towards them. Okay, and so we're going to finish this evening, and we're starting it like a lot of our studies have started, and it's with another genealogy, right? Another list of people. Okay, and so listen for some key characters, because the writer intentionally leaves out lots of details in creation, intentionally leaves out lots of details in the flood, intentionally leaves out lots of details in all of these genealogies. There's a lot more people than this, right? There's a lot going on, and there's just gaps. And the more comfortable you come with the gaps, the more you realize that the author isn't trying to solve all our problems, trying to solve our intellectual puzzles. The writer is trying to show how God was faithful in bringing about what he brought about and in doing what he does. Because here's the thing, God's about to promise the land to Abraham, and the original hearers are standing on that land about to receive it hundreds and hundreds of years later, right? So this writer was intentionally trying to help these people kind of get their minds right and saying, like, this is the promise. This is what God said hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This is the land he promised to Abraham, right? Abraham and his barren wife. Okay, so let's talk. Let's read. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 11. We'll go 10. I'm just going to read 10 through 26. Again, I do not know Hebrew names. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem, after he had fathered Arpachshad 500 years and had 2 years, and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. And after Eber had lived and fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug. And Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor, and Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah, and Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran, and fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father, Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, and the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren; she had no child. Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when he came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Okay, so what's here? Another genealogy. What stuck out to you?
The amount of years they live increases with each one.
Yeah, so it's getting, so like we had the 900 years, this and that, and yeah, years are decreasing, right? So they're not living as long. What else? We talked about why earlier. What else sticks out?
Everybody had children until Abraham.
Yeah. So there's the blessing is happening, right? So we've talked about every time after God restarted something, he blessed them and told them to multiply, right? Have kids, like fill the earth. And that was happening. And no doubt, as soon as the Israelites, recounting this story and remembering it, heard that word barren, like, what do you think came into their mind? Curse? Yeah. So she was cursed. I mean, that is a common understanding, even still, like in lots of Muslim worlds and different places. If you're barren, you're cursed by God. Like you must have done something, or he just chose to take that blessing from you, right? What else? What else do you think came into their minds? Like they're all direct descendants from Abraham, right? And so like the reality that their great, I don't know how many greats, grandma was barren, and Abraham was 75 years old. I mean, some of these people having kids at 30 and you know, this and that, and like he's old and he's barren, right? Like that gets you thinking, like they're looking around and there's hundreds of thousands of them. And they're like, man, she was barren. Right? Like this would not have happened unless God acted. Right? Like, and then so now we have kind of IVF and we have ways to help people who can't have kids, but there's still people who can't have kids. Right? There's still barren people. And then definitely there was no ability to move past that. Like if they couldn't have kids, they couldn't have kids. Yeah.
I found it interesting, like looking at the ages of all the people. They're all like 30, 32, 35, whatever. But Sarah was 70. Abram's dad was old. As well.
Yeah.
So, like, it's interesting. Like, even when God told Abram, like, you're going to have a son, Abram was old, but he still, like, his father was old too. So he should have had some sort of reason. Okay, you did this with my father.
Yeah. You can maybe do it with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. What else? I mean, I can't imagine Israel not thinking like, oh, some names we recognize. Father Abraham, or if they sing that song, you know, like they're like, oh, yeah, Isaac, Jacob, you know, like so we start hearing some characters that are pretty major in Scripture. That are, I mean, like a lot of these characters are referred to good or bad in the New Testament. Like these are going to be really important characters throughout Scripture. So Abraham is now mentioned, Sarai is now mentioned, Lot is now mentioned. And so we start hearing characters that are going to make sense to these people. And two, we hear the problem. Again, there's always a problem. And Sarai is barren, right? Like there is no hope of her having kids, right? So like the story should have stopped there, but it didn't. So good reminder for the hearer that people are limited, right? Kind of like what we prayed a second ago, right? Like the reality here is that they had no control over having babies or not having babies, and neither do we, really. I mean, like we have some advanced technologies that can now overcome some things, but it can't overcome everything, right? We're not in control. Good reminder that Israel is the result of like God moving, God working, right? The last time they were on the cusp of going into this land, they didn't have faith, right? They're like, no, we can't go in there. The people too big, it's too scary. And what happened? 40 years of wandering in the desert. Let that whole generation die off, that faithless generation die off. So this is the new generation getting ready to walk into the land, and they're hearing these stories of God's goodness and God's faithfulness and God's kindness, even in the face of being barren, even in the face, like they had decided that she was barren. If you read the rest of Genesis, I mean, Sarah's kind of cheeky. I mean, you know, she's snarky. She laughs at God, laughs at angels, talking about how am I going to have a kid? You know, like I didn't say that. She's also a liar. You know, like all this stuff. She wants Abraham to go into her servant, and then gets really mad about it. Like she's not great. She's not perfect, right? But God had a plan. God was again working and acting. So let's read that plan. So let's go into the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. So this is now chapter 12. And this is verses 1 through 4. So now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and to him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abraham went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Okay, so what's here? Talk to me about it. Like, what do you know about this covenant? What do you like about it? I mean, I really am not going to shoot you down tonight. I think there's a couple of things that this is, but we're going to look at it to what it was for Israel, right? That was entering the promised land. So what's here?
It's sort of easy to take it for granted
But saying just sort of leave your country and your family behind and go wherever I'm going to tell you to go is a pretty crazy step to take.
Yeah, huge deal. Huge deal. And I mean, so to do that then was a big deal, right? So now it's like leave America, but you can still talk to all your American friends, you still have an American bank account, you can still, like we still have that safety net of America, right? And so when I lived in China overseas for 2 years, like I was definitely living there. I mean, I didn't come back. I was there for 2 years, but the reality was I could talk to my mom whenever I wanted. I mean, I all my money was filtered through this bank account. I had connection with my family. If someone passed away, I could go back and go to that. If someone was getting married, Michelle, her brother got married during that time, so she went back home and was there for the wedding. Like we didn't leave our country, right? And so we talked about last week that this urbanization, that's what was happening at the Tower of Babel, right? People were starting to gather and have these communities that worked and helped each other, and that with that came safety, right? Like with that came security. And so the people were like, we have to build, or we have to urbanize, or else we're going to be dispersed and we're not going to be safe. Like we're going to be just small people, families walking around doing nothing. Let's be together, right? And so so Abraham, he's asked to leave 3 things, right? So the first is leave your country. And so what do you think that means? Like what was associated with a country at that time?
Leaving your religion and nationality and that kind of identity.
Yeah, so you're leaving your God, right? So Abraham was a pagan worshiper, right? Like each region had kind of like a main god that they loved and served, and they kind of built temples for different gods around the place or whatever. But like leaving that is leaving your religion, leaving your language, your God, your culture, all of that. So like that's a general leaving of who you are, right? Like all that you know and all that you understand. The next thing he's asked to leave is your kindred. So what's that mean?
Friends and family.
Yeah, close friends and family. It's not just a big group of people, but close friends. What comes along with that, leaving your kindred at this time?
Security.
Yeah, security. What else?
I think a lot of honor within the family.
Yeah, for sure. The honor of honoring ancestors, of keeping. I mean, a lot of times the small god was passed down, right? Like so. Forget the story. Who's the girl that steals her dad's god?
It's Lot's daughters.
Probably a couple of them. Rachel, yeah, and she sits on it in the tent and freaks out, and so it's going to happen again, right? So this idea of the God of the family to serve, to honor ancestors, to kind of all that heritage and culture with your kindred, the safety that provides, the provision that provides. It's not like, okay, get married and buy your own house. They would like get married and put another mud hut on the family house. They would all just live together. It was a very intimate culture. Okay, and the last is leave your father's house, and that's leave your name. Right, leave your inheritance, all that you have potentially for the future. And so God is systematically, almost in like concentric circles, asking Abraham to do what? Go ahead, Daniel. Yeah. We've heard it before, right? We know what this is. What is Abraham acting in? Faith, right? So it's funny because we want to always talk about how God's different, how God changes, how he just, now we have Jesus, and Jesus was really nice, and he did that really bad thing that was really painful, so I don't have to do that, right? And so like we have this, I always say it as kind of like, that gruff old man who's just mean, and everyone in town's like, you don't want to mess with him, but then he has a granddaughter, and like he just loves her and starts buying matching clothes, and then like gets her a little mini bike, and they're riding. Like he just melts, just becomes a completely different person because that one thing, something happened that made that gruff jerk of a man soft. And we like to do that with God. We like to think, man, Old Testament, gosh, Adam and Eve kicking out of the garden for eating a piece of fruit. We talked about that. It was bigger than that, right? Oh man, destroying the whole world. Now it's like a God temper tantrum. What's going on there, right? Like no, like God doesn't change. And that's what the writer of Genesis is trying to do with these 11 chapters. Like this God is the God who did all of these things. He doesn't act differently. He doesn't change. Like, this is the God we're trusting to give us this promised land. Let's go in to the promised land and receive it and take it. He doesn't change. He hasn't acted differently in Genesis 1 through 12, and he hasn't acted differently ever in eternity. He's the same God yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right? And so he's calling Abraham out, and Abraham has faith. And what are the promises he gives Abraham? Like, what is he calling him to? Exact same thing. Like, God's not, I mean, like, so I told you I don't want to take cheap lessons and just kind of minimize this to kind of make it like this is how you can be like Abraham. But the reality is God's never going to call you away from something without giving you something better. Here's the problem with that. You think, oh, if I break up with this person, then I'll get a cuter person, right? Like, or a better one, right? If I leave this major or this job, then I'll get a better job with more money and better things. It's like, no, like, God calls you out of your sin, right? What does he give you? Himself, right? Like, what does your sin give you? All of you, as soon as I said that, you thought of your sin, right? Some of you, it's like secret. No one knows, you think, right? You're just like, if anyone found this out, they would all hate me. They'd all think I'm a fraud. True, right? Like I've heard it all. I've been in 12 years. I think I've heard it all. Not all. I got time. But the reality is God calls us out of something, not to something worse, right? Like, so some of you have this mindset of like, Christianity's so lame. He's calling me out of this fun lifestyle, all this cool stuff that he has for me, just to not do stuff, just so somehow maybe in the future I can go to heaven or something like that. And some of you wouldn't say that out loud, but that's how you're living. Right? You're just like begrudgingly following him, like he's called you out of something good or better. Like, I can't do what I want to do, so I guess, I don't know, God's good. I know the Bible says that, but there's no joy and faith in your life. The reality is God's calling Abraham out. It's costly for him. Okay, and we know it's an act of faith because he's telling him, I'm going to make a nation out of you. And he knows his wife is barren. They've been trying to have kids forever. Like, every Jew tried to have kids. Well, they weren't Jews yet, but every person in this time tried to have kids quickly and all the time. Like, there's no birth control. There's no family planning. There's nothing of that, right? And so as soon as you're married, you're expected to be pregnant pretty quickly, and that's not happening. So Abraham believes God, right? And has faith and moves out, and God is promising to make him all the things that he's calling him away from, right? Promising to giving him a nation, land, right? A country, promising to give him a that starts small but actually gets really huge, and to build his name, give him inheritance, a great name again, and then promising to use him as a blessing to the whole world, right? And so the writer of Hebrews Hebrews. Someone got that in my brain. Who said Hebrews a second ago? Writers of Genesis is again highlighting how amazing and kind and good God is, right? So the cost was real, but the promises were also real. The promises were big, right? Like big name for yourself, big country, big nation. And so new land, new place to build, new heritage, to make Abraham a great nation from, it will grow and get big. And that's actually them. They were just enslaved for those 400 years. Like, he's talking about them right now. Like, that nation is this group of people that's going to enter the promised land, and then to bless him and make his name great. That growth will extend his name to the world. So what's God doing? Okay, so if we know that God is the main character, again, just like Noah's not talking, right? Noah kind of talked to some people a little bit, and then Abraham's going to kind of talk to his wife, but this is a story about what God is doing, right? Like, he is the active nature. He's the active character. He is the instigator. He's the one accomplishing things. So if that's true, we've heard that over and over again. He creates, he casts them out, right? He takes Esau. He's with Cain. He's with Abel. This and that. Like, so he's the one doing it. He's the one who's presented as the active character. If that's the case, and it is, what's he doing here? Like, what's God doing? What's the point of this? Me, I want to just go, like, he's starting missions. All right, that's how I've always read this. Like, he is beginning missions, like this idea that the whole world needs to know the gospel. And I think that's true. I think that is right, right? And so that's something that he's doing. What else is he doing? What else do you see God doing?
Just to steal the text, it says like, the earth will be blessed. So it's like blessing the earth.
Yeah. What else is he doing? I'll talk about that. So what else is God doing? What else do you see him doing? Daniel? Say it again.
Teaching them how to worship him.
Yeah. It's so amazing. Right? And so this story and the stories we've been talking about, the Bible starts with God creating a perfect place for people to be with him and to love him, to have no fear, no pain, no hurt. Right? And people chose to not trust him, right? And to sin against him and actually to be God, right? Actually almost like scoff at him and to believe what's not true and leave what's true. Okay? And so we want to automatically take this to Jesus. Right? Like because we are Christians where we've been living this story. We're actually the fruit of this blessing, right? Like, so like if you are in Christ, you can say like, you're just like Israel, kind of on the cusp of the promised land, saying like, God has done that for me. It came true. Like I'm a part of that reality. But the reality is, I don't think this covenant is as much connecting us to Jesus as it is restoring the worship that was lost at Babel, right? And so let me say it differently, right? So actually, I read a guy, he said it good. He said, the covenant corrects Babel, the cross corrects Eden. Okay, and so we just talked about this story where the worship had gotten so corrupted. People did not, I mean, they were just thinking up things. Like maybe if we build this tall tower and put a bed at the top of it and some food, God on his journey down would be refreshed and think, wow, these people are really nice. I needed that glass of water. I'm going to go down, see what they're doing, see what they need, go back up to heaven and bless them, right? So they made God like them, right? So like the best thing we can do when thinking about God is make God like us. And that's why we think God is mean, right? Like that's why we think God is selfish. That's why, how could God say that there's only one way to heaven? If I was God, right? Like we want him so desperately to be like us. But the reality is if you were God, this world would be a disaster. Think about just your personal life. Okay, think about the turmoil in your own life. Think about the sins that you hate, that you just wish you could get rid of. Think about the lies. Like, I mean, you might be lying to this person about something and lying to this person about something. And sometimes they kind of cross paths and you're like, ooh, makes you feel terrible. Right? Like, and that's just internally, right? The insecurities that you hate your body, you hate your voice, right? You hate your parents, you hate, I mean, just all of this just kind of defines us. Just one person, right? You are so distraught. You're so broken, right? You're so confused. And then just move that to your friend circle or to a couple of friend circles that you manage differently, right? That you hope they never cross, right? Your church friends and your baseball friends or your cheerleading friends or, you know, like your campus friends or whatever the case may be. So like those, I mean, like you are doing that there, you're confused, you don't know how to act, you don't know who you are, right? Like, and just imagine you ruling the world. You wouldn't do well, right? And that's why something like this, a God that is so clear and so consistent and so systematic and so kind and so gracious, who doesn't just wipe us all out, right? Like the world had gone so far from him, yet he kept a remnant, right? That he might gain worship. And then, so here's the thing, he confuses the language. That's so messed up. Why didn't he just, it's like he promised he wouldn't wipe them out again. The only fix is to kill them all, right? So he knew what he was going to do, and that is to bring Jesus, right? But this is just so beautiful because right after Babel, when God confuses the world and sends them out, he finds one of those confused pagan worshipers and he calls them and he teaches them how to worship him rightly, right? Like he begins the process of separating Israel. So like we always want to think like, oh, what makes Jews so special? Well, chosen nation, blah, blah, blah. They weren't special. That's the point, right? The point is if God just left them, no one would be special. We'd all hate each other and kill each other. And this whole thing would have started again. God in his kindness and his grace calls Abraham out and gives him this covenant, right? This idea that I'm going to be with you and I'm going to build a nation with you, and you're going to be my people. And through you, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. All these people I confused and scattered, I'm going to bring them back. And that's what we talked about, land, right? Like this world, like the crazy thing is the Bible starts and ends the same, right? Like God doesn't change. He doesn't have different ideas. He knew all this was going to happen. He knew what he needed to do to redeem people. He knew Jesus was going to have to come because we sinned. He knew that you would be in this room studying his word tonight, right? Like God is not, and that's the crazy thing. Like these people are waiting 5, 6, I don't know. I should have looked at how many years it took to get from Abraham to the very edge of the promised land. Right? But they're sitting here thinking like, God, are you that brilliant? Like, is this all really happening like you said it would happen? Right? Like you're the same yesterday and today and tomorrow, and you never go back on your promises. Like we're about to be living proof of that. Right? And so like God creates this nation, Israel, out of Abraham. Right? He enslaves them for 400 years that they might grow and blesses them, and then displays his power to them while leaving Egypt, and takes them on this journey, and is about like just begins to bring his presence, shows them what he's like. They don't deserve any of it. They were a slave nation. They're already complaining, right? Leads them to this promised land. They finally have a temple where he dwells, and then he brings about his son, Jesus. This is not like adding on. Like this is not God just being like, oh, didn't see that coming, crud. Okay, I better make a temple. Okay, I better make a Jesus. Like this is what God has been doing since Adam in the garden. Right? This has always been his plan. And like, even 11 chapters of the very beginning of this book shows how good and wise God is. And these people, I can't imagine them sitting about to receive this blessing, hearing these words, and like it was just read in crowds or whatever the case may be, and be like, it's happening. It's happening, right? It's crazy. Like, so here in this covenant, he is saying, I'm going to teach you how to worship me again. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to create a people for myself so that you can contrast with the world around you, so that when they see that I'm not like the gods they're serving, right? That I'm not angry and just confusing. I am sovereign. I'm kind. I'm good. I'm slow to anger. I am patient. I desire all to be saved and to know me, right? Like when they get to see a glimpse of who I am, they will too be drawn. And you are the fruit of that. Like your faith was established in a sense at this covenant, because without God interacting with this world, you would not know how to worship him. Right? Like even if you had this book, like what did Israel end up doing with their reality, with their, like, oh yeah, God hates the Gentiles. God hates the Samaritans. We're the chosen people. We know how to do this. We just obey rightly, and then God blesses us. Let's take the ark into battle. Let's see how that goes. It didn't go well. Right? Like nothing can ever happen. Like no one will ever bring us down. We are God's people. Babylon comes and just wipes them out. I mean, like God is just constantly showing that he is the sovereign. And like this nation had nothing special about them except for God moved, right? Abraham had nothing special about him except for God, right? Like Israel had nothing special, slave nation, except for God, right? And so like, don't get me wrong, you guys are all very special, but there's nothing special about you except for God. Right? And what I mean by that is your faith and your hope and your peace and your salvation and the cure for your sin, and like what's going to help you last past these 80 miserable years is him. Right? He is, it's just beautiful. Like, so it's crazy because like he's correcting their worship, and then the fruit of this. So like I like to think of the Old Testament as like a painting. Okay, and so the Old Testament, when you get to the end of the Old Testament, you have this perfect outline, right? It's just black and white, and it's just like this wonderful landscape. And then when Christ comes, it fills in all the color, right? Because like the reality is, you didn't know, was it nighttime? Was it daytime? There was no shading. There was no reality, right? It's just a shadow. It's just a piece. But then when Jesus comes, he makes it all make sense, and that's what the Lord is beginning, right? And so Babel. The covenant of Abraham corrects Babel, right? This idea of the people don't know me. They don't know how to worship me. And they're trying it on their own and they're ruining it. So I'm going to call Abraham out of that. And through him, I'm going to bless the whole world. The rest of the Old Testament is God building that, right? And then the Old Testament ends silent, right? Just waiting for something, right? When Jesus comes on the scene, he is that thing, right? And Jesus goes back and restores what happened in Eden, right? The broken relationship, the sin against God, the being cast away out of his presence, right? Because God says in the Old Testament, I don't care about your bulls. I don't care about your sacrifices. You think that pleases me? Like you're missing it, right? You're missing it. I called you out for myself and I'm building something and just wait, he's coming, and he did. Okay. And so I just find it beautiful. It's like, this is the epicenter of beauty. Right? Every hero, every story you've ever read, every love you've ever had, every piece of joy you've ever experienced, like God's plan and his design and organization provided that for you. And the writer of Genesis wanted you to know that. Constantly painting God as the king, the hero, the sovereign orchestrator. It's good. It's like we just get so wrapped up in Christian stuff, right? Israel got so wrapped up in Jewish stuff. And like we read the Bible hoping that we can get more Christian stuff that will kind of make us feel better. Isn't that what God does? He's supposed to kind of like fix our problems and make us feel better. We just get so small, right? Like our minds and our faith and our hope get so small that maybe today I'll feel better. Right? Like God called Abraham out of that. And Abraham had faith. And this is what God did. Right? What's God calling you out of? Right? Like I just can't help, because I mean, like if you think of Acts, like Acts is still happening. You know what I mean? Like you've heard that before. Like God is still building his church. Right? Like we're still kind of like, you're hearing this word this evening. Right? So we're not on the border of Israel, right? We're not on the border of the promised land, but like we're on the border of his promises. You know, and like as you sit and recount his word, as you hear it this evening, I just wonder, like, are you like Israel? I think this go around, they went and conquered and received the land and were thankful. Right? Like, are you filled with his blessing? Are you filled with peace and joy? Are you filled with clarity? Is he sanctifying you? Is he killing sin as your life? Is he exposing you? Is he accomplishing his love and his justice and his mercy and all his characteristics in you and through you? Or are you like the doubting few that's like, is this real? I don't want to go to battle. I don't want to go that. Like, we're going to take it from other people. Like, that's mean. Why would God do that? Like, just constantly questioning his character and his kindness and his goodness, who he is. I want to call you this evening. And at the end of this study, like the writer has gone through great pains to paint a picture of a good God who acts in good ways to accomplish good things for the world. Is that how you view him? Like when you hear his word, is that what you think? Or is it just this burden, just this confusing set of rules and set of laws? Because don't get me wrong, there's a lot that you need to do if you're a Christian. But God has promised to produce that in you. Like he's the active agent. He's the person, or is it just you? Right? Like, is he the one who's moving and accomplish things? Or is it just you? Because just like Babel, God will confuse misguided worship. Right? God, we talked about that last week. Like if you're frustrated with your faith, if you're tired of your God, like if you just wish that you could just kind of build a bed in the sky that he would come sleep in one night and then give you all of your heart's desires, you've missed him. And he's not going to meet you there because that's a false God. Right? But like Abraham, forsaking everything behind him, trusting God, because he experienced, I mean, like these experiences are pretty major. Noah's like, build a boat? Okay, I'll build a boat. Whoa, what was that? Everyone's like, leave everything? Okay, I'll leave everything. Like they experienced something real and true, who was sovereign and called them out of something, and they listened, and in faith they obeyed. And I think that's probably happened with most of you in here. If not, I want to talk to you. Right? But if it is and you're just struggling, man, so often the diagnosis is you don't think highly enough of God. You think too highly of yourself. Right? You don't think highly enough of his ways. You think if I was in charge, why doesn't he just, like, you're just so consumed with your ways. Trust him. Right? The God who in 11 chapters can create the world and then begin to recreate the world. Right? Like he can recreate you. He can heal your wounds. Right? He can forgive your sin. He can actually overcome your sin and give you new life. he is so active and able. Just trust him, right? And so I just think it's beautiful. It's just crazy as I was studying this and kind of seeing how being taught from the word and from other men who study the word that, like, now this covenant helps with Babel, which then leads to the new covenant, which helps with Eden. Right? I just love it. I think that's amazing, and so I hope these covenants are accomplishing those things in your life. Right? I hope you can look at the Old Testament, the New Testament, the way God's designed worship, and say, thank you for bringing clarity to my confusion. Right? And I hope that you can look at Jesus and say, thank you for bringing salvation to my death. Right? That's the beauty. And that's the thing. The first 11 chapters of this Bible, like, it's the same thing in the middle books and in the end books. It's not a confusing religion. Right? Stop acting like Christianity is this like set of puzzles that if you put together right, the gumball machine will give you a free one without a quarter in it, right? You ever do that when you're a kid? Just sitting there just trying to like get something out of it, and like you just got it, and that one day it was just like, finally my heart's desires, 3 Skittles, right? Like, it was amazing, and that's so many of you are tinkering with God, just like trying, just like Israel, or just like people at Babel, just like Israel, just like me often, just like, can I just, if I do that, take a step back and read the word and read about the unchanging sovereign God of the universe who's orchestrated all these things for your good, right? Sit and relish in that, and then be free in the gospel. And he's done so much to correct your worship, to correct your life, and he's done the only, like, just like Sarah, this is how we'll end. I'll stop talking in just a second. She was barren, right? She had no hope. Israel had no hope. God knew that. And in doing that, he did a miracle and gave her the ability to carry out what he asked her to do. Right? And the same thing. And that's how he saves us. Right? You had no hope. Right? Like, your heart was barren, had no hope of producing fruit. Right? And God did a miracle, gave you a new heart, and now he's producing fruit in you and through you. That is the character and nature of God, and that is what the beginning of Genesis is all about. It's about these new people that are they're seeing the tabernacle, that are growing. They needed to see the right God because their worshiping had been corrupted. Right? They had misunderstood how to relate with him, and he made a way that they might relate with him. Right? A temporary holding place, a shadow, a black and white picture. Right? The temple, the sacrificial system, the priests, until the true temple, the true sacrifice, the true priest could come and fill it all in and blow all of our minds. It's just amazing. He's just amazing. And so that is the end of our study in Genesis, right? It starts with a perfect land, and at 11, it ends with the promise of a perfect land. Right? Like, and that is where this world is going. God is going to recreate it back to what he created in the beginning. Right? But this time, Jesus will be the king, and we'll see him, and we'll be like him. Right? The enemy will be destroyed. Like, there's just so much to it, right? And so it's just crazy. Like, in 11 chapters, it's already kind of begun, like, the story of him creating this new land that you're enjoying if you're in Christ is starting. And 11 chapters into the Bible. It's beautiful. Right? It's beautiful. And so that's it. And so as kind of a closing, I just want to encourage you guys and gals. We know this has been hard. We know COVID has not been easy. We know there's a lot of unrest in the world. We know a lot of you are confused. It's just easy to isolate. We know that classes are going to be very few and far between on campus. Just know that the staff is here to serve you. Like, we want you to do well. We want you to, if COVID just crushed your heart and you just dove right into sin or dove right into despair and fear, and you feel like there's no hope out of that, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to connect you to your pastor. We'd love to just do what it takes to kind of help you take the next step. And we'd love to be a place that helps other people. If you have someone that that's coming to campus, just drag them here, right? Just bring them, like, not for our sake, not for more people. We just love God's word, and we love the gospel, and we love how he continues to use it to grow and sanctify college students here at this campus. Because it's hard to be on this campus. And so this semester, we are here for you. We're going to pivot, we're going to change, we're going to adapt and readapt, but know that what we do in this ministry and what we do at this building won't stop. It'll just be responsible. Masks on, hand sanitizer rubbed in. Still going to have men's and women's Bible studies, still going to have discipleship, still going to have disciple makers trainings. right? Still going to have all the stuff that we normally do through a semester, just in a different way. So the easiest way to get all the information, I know not all of you are on Instagram, but Sophia runs our Instagram, and she puts out announcements about everything that we do and just keeping you clear. And so if you don't have Instagram, just talk to Sophia. Like, hey, what's the news? And she'll give it to you. Just be here. Our website has some stuff, but COVID's going to be a little tricky, so we're not going to be constantly updating the website. But just be here, know that we care about you a whole lot. Okay, and so this table, these are the gifts we have for our seniors. Those will go into a frame that we'll give to them, that they can hang up at their new desk or put in their room or put in their trunk and never get it out, and they sell the car and it goes with the car or whatever. But we still want you to know we love you. So if you haven't signed these, we would love for you to sign them. Just honor the seniors, encourage them on the way out. This will be the last time they're out. And so if you haven't done it, please do that this evening. If you don't know the person, just give them a thumbs up and say congrats and go from there. Did we end up getting treats? So we have a little ice cream to send you on your way with, because it's delicious. And know that we care about you. Wish we could hang, wish we could sit and chat and talk. But that's coming again. It's coming again. And so I'm going to go ahead. If you want to go and fill out stuff, go ahead and release people to go do that. You guys just kind of keep a safe distance. And otherwise, front row, I'm going to go ahead and release you to enjoy some, are they just ice cream sandwiches? What are they, fudgesicles?
There's choices, so just tell me what you want.
If you want something. Guys, have a wonderful evening. Mike, you got any tunes to head us out? Awesome.